So this is Mast Cells and the Mind. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming this evening. So this is me, just an introduction. If you don't know who I am, I'm a health coach and a mindfulness teacher and also a hypnotherapist. I have qualifications as a naturopathic nutrition and health coach and a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist, and also teaching mindfulness. And I also volunteer for Mast Cell Action. And I'm a member of the National Council for Integrative Psychotherapists and the UK International Health Coaching Association, and also the Association of Naturopathic Practitioners. But really, I think what gives me the kind of the right, as it were, or the authority to stand up here and have anything to say to you this evening is because I live with mast cell activation syndrome. I live with Lyme disease, dysautonomia, and chronic pain, like many of you do as well. So what I'm going to talk about tonight are things that I've learned on my own journey and that I use with my own health and that I found helpful for me with my health specifically. So I want to start by saying that it's when we talk about mental well-being, particularly with chronic illness, I feel it's so important to make the point that we're not implying in any way that mast cell activation syndrome is a mental condition or a psychosomatic illness, because I know that a lot of you have experienced that kind of medical disbelief from the doctors and people that you may have seen, and I have as well, and I know how triggering and upsetting that can be. And so I really want to be clear that this is about how we look after our mental well-being whilst we live with our health conditions, and about a bit about how supporting our mental and emotional well-being can benefit us physically and mentally. But it's not suggesting in any way that we can magically cure ourselves by thinking differently or thinking happy thoughts or doing mindfulness. And I think it's so important to say that from the beginning. And even having said that, I know that talking about mental well-being can still feel difficult and challenging. So I just want to let you know that this is a safe space here tonight, and there really is no judgment, and it's not about, you know, judging ourselves or beating ourselves up in any way. And if it does feel difficult at any point, please feel free to switch off your camera or leave if it's too upsetting. I won't be offended. No one will judge you if this is not what you feel you need at the moment, because we're all on different journeys at different points in our journey. So it's really important that you do what you need to do to feel safe and to feel well and to keep yourself well, because I know that stress and distress can make us poorly. So it's really important to do what you need to do for your health. And as I said, we are going to leave some time at the end for questions, and you can pop those in the chat, or you can just unmute at the end and, you know, and ask me. I will apologize in advance. There's a lot of words on my slides. It's because I suffer with brain fog, like most of you, I'm sure, and I need the prompts to remind me what to say. So please don't feel overwhelmed by the slides and feel you've got to read all of that and take it all in. It's there to remind me. So when my brain goes blank, I remember what I'm doing and who I am. So I just want to start off really with a bit of a disclaimer to say that we are all in different places and we all need different things. As I just said, even with MCAS, everybody experiences it differently, as we know, and we're all affected differently by, you know, different symptoms. And I'm going to share some of the things that I've discovered on my own journey that helped me. And some of these things, you know, you might already know. You're all experts in your own condition and in your bodies, and I may be teaching you to suck eggs, and, you know, feel free to ignore, you know, whatever doesn't land for you. Some things might be challenging and they might not, you know, resonate with you, and that's absolutely fine, because what works for one person won't necessarily work for another. We're all so different. So I always say to all of my clients and with all of my courses, take what lands for you. If you feel that's really helpful, I really like that idea, take it and use it. And if you think, that doesn't, you know, I don't like that, then just leave it. That's fine. and it's okay for you to disagree with me. I'm not up here as some kind of, expert. So you might feel differently. You might feel that for you, other things work better. Take what works for you and leave the rest, and only do what feels right for you. But I do always say that, I encourage people to revisit these things at a later date and explore whether something might be right for you now, because as we go through our journeys, our situation changes, and what doesn't work now might work for you in a month's time or a year's time. It might be, what you need at that time. So come back to these ideas regularly and just see if things have changed and if something might help you. So what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to cover a little bit about anxiety and mast cell activation syndrome and stress and MCAS. I'm going to talk a little bit about mast cells and the nervous system and how they work. We're going to explore a little bit about how our fight and flight and, that kind of sympathetic and the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous systems interact and impact on MCAS, and some of the ways that we can use our minds and these kind of tools to support us when we live with MCAS, and a bit about feeding safety into our system and why that's so important. And I'm going to share some tips for helping us to stay mentally well whilst we live with MCAS, because it is really challenging and really unpleasant at times and really difficult, and that can get to us mentally and emotionally. So I'm going to share some tips. I will do a short practice at the end if there's time, and if people want me to do that, I'm happy to do a short kind of experiment so you can have a little taster of some mindfulness. There is a booklet with the text of this talk in Mast Cells in the Mind resource on the Mast Cell Action website. And I think Henrietta is going to pop the link in the chat for you all. So that will take you to that resource, and all of the information that is in the talk tonight is in that booklet. So you don't need to scribble everything down. Feel free to download that. So I'm going to start with a couple of lovely quotes that really resonate with me. And the first one is Viktor E. Frankl. And I don't know if any of you have come across him, but he was a Holocaust survivor. He was in a Nazi prisoner of war camp. And he then went on to become a psychiatrist and wrote a book about man's search for meaning. And this lovely quote: when we're no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that really is a lot of what we're talking about tonight. Is we can't change the fact that we have MCAS. It is a condition that we have, and our symptoms exist and they are difficult, but how we deal with that and how we can change ourselves can sometimes have a really big impact on our well-being. And don't try to calm the storm, calm yourself. The storm will pass, which is attributed to Buddha. And again, some of these tools that I'm going to teach you and talk about tonight are ways in which you can calm yourself whilst the storm of MCAS is kind of raging around you, hopefully. So I just want to start by posing some questions, and you don't feel you have to answer these. You can share in the chat if you want to, but really it's about starting to think about these questions yourself, and maybe go away from the session tonight and think about these questions a little bit and begin to explore that for you and what it means for you, because living with physical health problems is challenging and it does get us down. And it's really important that we take time and give some thought. We often get so caught up with doctor's appointments and seeing, specialists and researching and trying to cure our physical body. We neglect our mental and our emotional kind of care as well. So how do you feel about your own mental health? How do you feel your MCAS impacts your mental and emotional well-being? Do you feel that you suffer with anxiety or depression because of your MCAS? Does it get you down? How do you take care of your mental well-being? And that is so important, that we all think about this and are honest with ourselves. Are you taking care of your mental and emotional well-being as much as you need to? And what can you do to do that? How do you make time for self-care? How do you look after you? And self-care looks different for everybody, but what tools can you use to look after your own mental and emotional health? So I want to start with anxiety and MCAS. And I just want to say that when we have a reaction, it's a really unpleasant experience and it can feel really scary, and it's completely normal to feel anxious. Anxiety is a normal human emotion that happens when we experience difficult things. So it's totally normal and understandable that when you're having a horrible reaction and you're feeling really poorly, you'll feel anxious about that. And we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. It's, you know, it's part of our experience, and it's okay to recognize I'm feeling anxious. This is horrible, and I feel anxious right now. And, you know, we can become anxious about foods or going to places, or what if we're exposed to something. That's really normal to feel like that. Anybody would in our situation. So it's really important to validate how we feel and to acknowledge that, and to plan coping strategies in advance. And hopefully some of the tools that I'm going to talk to you about are ways in which, you know, you might think to yourself, I might feel anxious when this happens, so I'm going to do this to help myself. So it's really helpful sometimes to have coping plans in place for when we feel a bit anxious about our circumstances. But having said that, the flip side of that is to understand that anxiety can be a symptom of MCAS. Histamine is a really powerful neurotransmitter, and we're going to get into that in a little while, but it activates our nervous system, and histamine is very stimulating for the nervous system. It's a kind of upper, it puts energy through the nervous system. And our mast cells are very closely linked. They're physically connected and, you know, next to our neurons, our nervous cells. They're kind of paired, and they lie next to each other along all the surfaces. Where there's mast cells, there's also nerve cells. They're really close to one another. So it's understandable that when our mast cells start degranulating, when they release their chemicals, if they're producing histamine and other neurostimulating substances, you might notice that when you have a reaction, you feel wired. Your stress tolerance becomes lower. I think of it like bandwidth. You know, you've already got in that moment loads and loads of input going through your nervous system in the terms of chemical input into your nervous system. So we then have less room for stress and for normal things like the doorbell ringing or the telephone going off or somebody asking us a question. Normally that wouldn't affect us, but we don't have enough space in our nervous system to cope with things when we're in a reaction sometimes, because of that chemical effect on our nervous system. So it's important to recognize that sometimes it's not, you know, a mental health issue or an emotional issue. I don't even call that anxiety because I'm not anxious. It's a physical thing. Our nervous system is upregulated as part of a reaction. So it's important to kind of distinguish, is this anxiety because I'm worried about something, or is this physical anxiety because my nervous system is responding to an MCAS reaction? When we understand that a little bit more, sometimes we can see that happening and know what's happening to us. And Beth O'Hara from Mast Cell 360, she has some really great resources on how MCAS impacts the nervous system. I've put some references there for some articles as well, medical sort of research that kind of explains that. But yeah, it's worth having a look at Mast Cell 360 if you're interested in this. So that's sort of a bit about anxiety. Now, stress and mast cells. And I'm sure that many of you will have noticed that you, as I've just said, you feel less able to deal with stress when your mast cells are flaring. You have less stress tolerance when you're in a reaction, and that's really normal. However, the other side of that is you may also notice that stress is a trigger for you. And when you experience mental or emotional stress or difficult things happen, it triggers reactions and can cause your mast cells to actually release and cause a flare. So our mast cells and the nervous system talk to one another. I've already alluded that they're really connected. There's receptors on our nervous system cells, on neurons. There's receptors for the mast cell mediators. So when the mast cell mediators or mast cells release their mediators, they bind with the nervous system cells, the neurons, and the neurons hear that message. They're listening. And the other way around, there are receptors for neurotransmitters on mast cells. So the neurons release their neurotransmitters like adrenaline and cortisol, and also dopamine and oxytocin, serotonin. They're being released by neurons. When they're released, mast cells hear that. Those neurotransmitters bind onto the mast cells, and the mast cells receive that message. So they're always in communication with one another. They're always sensing how the other one is doing and feeding back to each other in this kind of feedback loop. So when our nervous system is aroused and our nervous system is sending out danger signals, it's releasing adrenaline and cortisol, and we're worried about something and we're in a stress state, our mast cells hear that message. And our nervous system is constantly sensing whether we're safe or not. It's constantly monitoring for signs and signals of danger and sending those signals through the body. And then our mast cells are part of our defense mechanism. They are there to protect us. So when the mast cells receive a signal from the nervous system that we might be in danger, it's natural that they will then release their inflammatory cytokines and their other mediators because they want to protect us. They think there's a threat. And so that triggers them because they perceive there's a threat. And that is the mechanism by which stress triggers our mast cells and can trigger a reaction. So you're not imagining it, and it's not psychosomatic. It's not like, oh, I'm stressed, so I'm imagining that I'm reacting to this, and I've brought it on myself by thinking, and being stressed. It's actually a physical biochemical process that happens in our bodies because the mast cells and the nervous system are constantly talking to each other. And this happens outside of our control. As I just said, we're not to blame for this. It's not our fault. We're not causing this to happen. It's just natural that that happens. And so when we understand that relationship and why we react to stress, we know that it's just natural happening in our bodies between these two communication pathways. So that can help us to understand what's happening. However, because we understand this now, we can kind of use this to leverage some advantage for ourselves. Once we understand that our nervous system and our mast cells are talking to each other and communicating like this, we can use this to our advantage and help us to manage our MCAS, because mast cells also respond to positive chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine, and they respond positively, and it helps to calm our mast cells. So getting stressed can make our mast cell reactions worse, but similarly, staying calm or being relaxed, putting ourselves into a state of relaxation and feeling positive emotions and feeling happy calms our mast cells down and can help to soothe them and stop them reacting or make them stop reacting quicker. So we can, to some extent, send signals of safety into our nervous system, and by doing that, because we can't control our mast cells directly, but we can control our nervous system a little bit. So we can control what state we're in and signal to our mast cells, I want you to calm down. There is no danger. And that can give us a little bit of leverage over our symptoms. So the state of safety, I think, is a really, really important thing to understand. and it's something that I've used a lot on my own journey. And this is based around the work of Dr. Stephen Porges. It's known as polyvagal theory, and he writes in his papers about the vagus nerve, which this is the main nerve of the autonomic nervous system. It travels all the way from the base of the skull all the way down through our throat, our voice box, and into our lungs, and it activates and innervates all of the organs in our body, our lungs, our heart. It's responsible for controlling our heart rate and our breathing and our digestion and the function of all of our internal organs. And it is responsible for switching between the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. So it can be in 3 different states, our vagus nerve. So we can either be in rest or digest, which is known as the parasympathetic. And that is our optimal state. It's called ventral vagal state, and it's when we are relaxed and calm and happy and feeling sociable with other people and supported and safe. Crucially, we're feeling safe in that state. And then there's the sympathetic branch, which is responsible for the fight or flight. So we all know that feeling of, oh gosh, I could be in danger, I've got to jump up, I might have to fight, or I might have to run away. That's anxiety. That's when we get that wired feeling. That's sympathetic activity. And also the freeze response, which is a little bit outside of what we're talking about tonight, but there is a 3rd state, which is the dorsal vagal state, which is freeze, collapse, when, an animal will potentially sort of, play dead, as it were, in order to avoid being caught by the predator. And that's a sort of state of shutdown where we feel dissociated and lethargic, and we, it's the opposite of being activated in fight or flight, really. So for our purposes tonight, we're going to focus on the rest and digest and the fight and flight. And the rest and digest state is the state that we want to be in most often, because to be optimally healthy at a cellular level, we need to be predominantly in rest and digest. Our immune system functions properly in rest and digest. Our gut functions properly in rest and digest. All of our bodily functions are working at their optimal level, and our cells can repair and regenerate when we're in rest and digest. But when we're in fight and flight, we don't function as well, and our cells don't repair, and our immune system doesn't work optimally, and we don't function as well. So the more often we can keep ourselves in a state of rest and digest, the better our bodies function overall. And these 2 slides are just explaining a little bit about the difference between these 2 states. So fight or flight, our bodies are producing cortisol and adrenaline, and we know that they're really harsh on our body long term. They're meant to be short, things that happen to help us run away from a tiger, and it's over very quickly. But when we're stuck in fight or flight and we're exposed to cortisol and adrenaline all the time, they have really difficult effects on our bodily functions and prevent our bodies from functioning properly. We feel under stress, our heart is put under extra pressure, our immune system doesn't work properly, because when we're running away from a tiger, we don't need our immune system, we don't need to worry about bugs. That's a secondary, worry. And so cortisol switches off our immune system, so we can't fight infections properly. We can't produce antibodies because that's really costly in energy to do that. So the body prioritizes running away and uses our energy for that and switches off our immune system. We don't digest our food properly. Our stomachs stop working when we're in this state. So we don't extract all the nutrients that we need from our food, and our bowel doesn't work properly. We don't eliminate toxins. Basically, I'm going to talk about poo now. I'm going to go there. We can't eliminate our toxins if we're not having regular bowel movements. And when we're in fight or flight, our bowels are not working properly. And as I said, our cells stop repairing and regenerating. It's like being in a war zone. When you're under attack, you don't go away and start rebuilding things. You're prioritizing your energies on defense. So our body exists constantly in the state of we could be in danger. We've got to protect ourselves, and it's not doing all the cellular regeneration and repair. But on the flip side of that, when we're in rest and digest, we produce lots of positive neurotransmitters that make us feel good and send positive signals through the body, like serotonin and oxytocin and GABA. These are all really positive, relaxing, happy chemicals that signal safety to our nervous system and to our immune system, to our mast cells. And we also produce nitric oxide, which is an amazing substance. And there are studies that show that self-compassion practices, when we practice self-compassion, we release nitric oxide, and it's really good for heart health. It's protective to the heart. But there's fascinating studies, I've just been reading them this morning, that show that nitric oxide is potentially a mast cell regulator. So when we are feeling good and feeling happy, we're releasing nitric oxide, and that can calm the mast cells. And in this rest and digest state, our heart is protected, our immune systems work better and protect us properly. Our antibodies are functioning. We can fight off bugs properly. We're digesting our food properly and extracting all the nutrients. We're eliminating chemicals and hormones, because histamine, once it's been released, or any of the neurotransmitters, hormones, and also inflammatory cytokines and things like that, and histamines, they have to be detoxed out through our bowel. So if we don't eliminate things properly, then that histamine gets reabsorbed. So it affects our histamine levels. But when we're in rest and digest, we're having regular bowel movements, we're getting rid of all that waste so it doesn't get reabsorbed and build up. And our cells start doing this repair and regeneration work, and our bodies start to heal. Basically, it's what we call a healing state. When we're in the rest and digest, it allows our bodies to heal and do what they need to do. So that's the difference really between being in fight and flight and rest and digest. And you can see that this is why I believe that feeling safe and feeding in messages of safety when we're not very well is one of the most important things we can do when we live with chronic illness, because it's natural when we are feeling poorly to go towards the fight and flight. We're worried all the time. We're anxious all the time. We're thinking, how can I get better? But I think it's kind of like a cruel sort of trick that nature plays on us, that once we feel poorly, it's natural that we worry and we feel stressed, but that stress then feeds into making us feel even more poorly. So we then get stuck, if we're not careful, in a really vicious cycle. So by feeding in signals of safety as often as we can put ourselves into that healing state and give our bodies the very best chance of doing what they can do to make themselves better or to reduce symptoms, switching off that fight or flight, switching on the rest and digest. And it's also really crucial for mental well-being. We feel mentally well when our brains perceive that we're safe. And when our brains perceive danger and potential threat, we then, get adrenaline and cortisol, which makes us feel anxious, and we experience anxiety and depression and difficult mental and emotional states. And I think this is really linked to this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of need. And some of you may know about this because it's been around a long while. I can't remember when Abraham Maslow started doing this research, but it was in the early 20th century, I think. He published this idea of a hierarchy of need. And you can see there on the triangle, at the bottom of the triangle is our physiological needs. We have to have water and food and shelter in order to function. And then the next level up is safety. We have to be safe. These are fundamental human needs that we need in place before we can do anything else. And then we have the layer of feeling that we belong, that we're part of a community and that we're loved. And then we have a sense that we have something to offer. We have self-esteem because we have a world that we can contribute to. We have gifts that we can, and skills and talents that we contribute. And then at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, this concept that we are achieving all that we can possibly achieve. We're reaching our full potential. So it becomes really difficult for us to feel safe when we're poorly. Our sense of safety gets compromised when we live with MCAS. That's understandable because we kind of do feel under attack from all these triggers and things that make us poorly. It is hard to feel safe. I know I didn't feel very safe in my own body when I became poorly. And we don't feel safe in our environment. It's hard to, your basic human needs like eating become tricky, and that's really difficult for us. And that really affects our well-being and our mental health. So we need, when we're in that state, to kind of take back control and make a conscious effort to feed that safety into our system, because it's such a fundamental need for us in order to be able to be well. So some of the things that we can do to send in these signals of safety, I'm going to go through all of these in more detail, but these are just some of the ideas. So staying calm as much as possible, thinking calming thoughts and helpful thoughts, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. Breathing exercises, mindfulness tools, doing gentle restorative exercise like Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga, particularly certain types of yoga, not all types of yoga, some of them are a bit stimulating, but restorative yoga and yoga nidra, they feed in safety to the nervous system. Positive affirmations are another tool. Noticing joyful moments and feeling feelings of joy as often as you can, and noticing things to be grateful for. And again, I know these are difficult concepts sometimes, so I'm going to talk through those a little bit. And then being kind to ourselves, this idea of self-compassion is a really key part of it. So starting with our thoughts, our minds and our nervous systems can't tell the difference between what we're imagining in our minds and what we're thinking in our minds and reality. They respond physically to both as if it was a real and present danger. So if we're, if we're thinking panicky thoughts, our bodies think, oh, there's something really dangerous happening and that we are actually in danger. And it's why, if you think about it, we cry at sad films, or we jump when we're watching the horror movie and the Axeman jumps out. We know that there's no Axeman in our living room with us, but we still jump because our nervous system is responding to what's going on in our imaginations. And, goosebumps, as I've said there, when you're reading a thriller, are, as I say, we cry real tears. Someone, the main character in a film passes away, we cry, or I cry. Maybe just me, but our bodies actually physically respond with real tears. And that just goes to show the power of our imaginations on our physical body. So because of that, we can, to some extent, control the state we are in and what signals our nervous system is sending to our bodies and the physical responses by what we choose to think about and what we imagine. And we can choose whether we're operating in a predominantly danger state where we're constantly fueling this idea that everything's terrible and we're in danger, or whether we're operating in a state of safety where we feel safe and we tell ourselves that we're okay and everything's, safe for us. So I just want to be really clear here again. We're talking here about biology, not mythology. So I'm not saying that if you think happy thoughts all the time, you won't have MCAS, your mast cells won't degranulate and you won't react to things, because obviously that's not true. We're not talking about a mental health condition here. This is a physical health condition. And I'm not saying that you should feel happy that you have MCAS and think, oh, how wonderful that I'm poorly like this and I feel really dreadful and I'm reacting to things. I'm so pleased. So this is not about that idea of sort of Pollyanna syndrome, trying to fake being happy and saying, oh, yes, everything's fine, you know, and your limb is hanging off or whatever. It's not about pretending that things are fine. And it's also not about this idea of manifesting. You know, some people believe that what we think, you know, comes back to us from the universe. And that's, you know, it's fine, but it's a different thing to this. This is about the biochemistry that's happening in our bodies, about the chemicals that we're releasing in our bodies and the physical effects that they have on our health. And the analogy that I use is like a campfire, if you like, in the woods. So the fire is burning. We have MCAS. We can't just, you know, magically make that go away just by thinking, but we can choose to calmly sit next to the fire and just let it burn out and wait for it to be over. Or we can throw petrol on the flames and make it explode into an inferno. And that's the kind of analogy that I'm getting at here. There's a choice that we can make, and what we choose can affect how we feel. So again, thinking about thoughts, we tend to judge our thoughts about whether they're true or not true. And it's absolutely true that living with MCAS can be really awful and difficult, horrible, frightening, stressful, frustrating, and it absolutely can be cruel and unfair. And it's really understandable for us to think about how difficult things are for us, how miserable we feel. It's understandable that we worry about the future. I worry about the future. I feel anxious sometimes about my situation. It's really normal to feel that way. However, what I try and use in my own mind is not, is it true or not? It's whether it's helpful or unhelpful in your personal current situation. So, for example, it is absolutely true. I could think now I might have a reaction tomorrow and it might be awful. That's true. I might have a reaction tomorrow and it might be awful. But is it helpful for me to think that? Because by thinking that, I'm triggering those stress hormones to be released. I'm triggering those danger signals in my nervous system, which then start signaling my mast cells that there's potential danger, which is possibly making it more likely that I will have a reaction. So I don't know that I'm going to have a reaction, but I could actually trigger a reaction now just by worrying about that. It's really important to say it's not possible to stop thinking these thoughts. Our minds think things. We're not in control of our thoughts, and we're not our thoughts. They just pop into our heads. So again, we're not beating ourselves up here about thinking these thoughts, but we can become aware of them and we can choose to change our thoughts. So in the analogy of the fire, we can reduce the time we spend throwing matches at ourselves by noticing these thoughts and thinking, maybe that's not helpful. I'm going to think something different. So we're just becoming aware of how often we start thinking these things, how much time we are spending thinking the unhelpful types of thoughts, and we're then feeding that danger signal into our bodies instead of safety. So just to sort of clarify, we're noticing these thoughts and we're choosing to replace the more unhelpful ones with helpful ones. And the process for that is just to begin with, just becoming aware of our thoughts. So we're starting to notice how often we're spending thinking about, you know, how difficult things are and worrying about the future and feeling anxious and thinking these sorts of thoughts. We're just noticing that and noticing when we're focusing on that, not beating ourselves up for it, because it's okay to find it hard and things are difficult. It's not pleasant. But then we can choose to think, maybe I'll think something different, and choosing to turn our minds away from that and focus on something that we could call a helpful thought. So thinking about good things, things we enjoy, things that make us happy as often as possible, showing our minds that, if you like, putting that at the forefront of our minds. And when we're doing that, we're feeding that sense of safety into our nervous system, and we're helping our bodies to stay in a healing state and reducing those dangerous signals being sent to the mast cells. It's not possible to stay in that state all the time. None of us, even, Buddhist Zen masters or whatever, none of us operate in that parasympathetic rest and digest state of calm, even when life is optimal and all things are happy. But this is about acknowledging what's happening for us, not beating ourselves up, and doing the best we can. So if you can spend 20% of your day thinking happy things and focusing on happy things, that's better than spending 100% of the time feeling miserable. It's about small steps. It's just a process, and some days are harder than others. Some days I don't manage this. I'm having a rough day and I spend all day in bed feeling miserable and sorry for myself. It's hard, but we can make those decisions now we know this information. So very quickly, I'm going to run through some of the other things that we can use to signal safety, which are breathing exercises, mindfulness tools, affirmations, that joyfulness and gratitude, and then not beating ourselves up, which is kind of a big aspect of, being kind to ourselves, cultivating self-worth, taking steps to our own well-being, and taking back some control. So breathing exercises, the breath is really powerful because it's constantly signaling to our vagus nerve whether we're safe or whether we're in danger. The breath is one of the main tools that signals the vagus nerve safety or danger. And the in-breath is the stress breath. So if someone creeps up behind you, you go like that, and then you realize they're not dangerous and you go, ah. So the out breath is the breath of relaxation. And the great thing about the breath is that it is an involuntary process, but we can choose to take control of it and control our breath. And by deliberately making our out breath longer than our in breath, you're switching on that parasympathetic system. You're putting yourself in rest and digest. And there's various different breathing tools. YouTube is full of different breathing techniques, and you can go into this in great depth. Some of the more popular ones are people suggest you breathe in for 7 and out for 11. So you can try that one. It's 7-11 breathing, or 4-6-8. So you breathe in for 4, hold for 6, and out for 8. The thing about this is, do what works for you. If breathing in for 4 and out for 6 is your comfort pattern, go with what feels comfortable for you. You're just trying to make that out breath just a little bit longer than the in breath. So it can be 7-9 if that's your breathing, or 2-6, whatever you breathe. You don't want to be forcing your breath to fit someone else's count, because then you end up hyperventilating, which has the opposite effect. So do whatever feels comfortable for you, but count in and then count out for longer than you. And that's a relaxation breath. Mindfulness practice. I teach a whole course, 8 weeks, on how to use mindfulness for pain and chronic illness. So this is the tiniest, briefest snapshot here, but basically mindfulness, the definition is the act of becoming aware of our present moment experience and welcoming what we find with a kind and open heart. And it's basically about learning to stay present in this moment. And it saved me really when I was poorly, because you can go down that rabbit hole of what if I never get better, what's going to happen? And I just kept thinking, stay in the present moment, just get through the next moment, the next minute. I spent 8 months of my life living 1 minute at a time. And that can just help to calm the nervous system. There's lots of research into how staying present is calming for the nervous system. And we work with noticing our thoughts, observing our thoughts. So we're not caught up in our thoughts, we're just watching the thoughts. And again, using the breath as part of mindfulness, we use our senses and we use movement. There's lots of different tools in mindfulness that can ground us in the present moment. And we're just observing what's happening in our present moment experience and learning to do that. And there is a free mindfulness meditation recording that I've done on the Mast Action website, and there's also a few free downloads on my website as well from mindfulness practice, so you can have a little practice with some mindfulness. Affirmations, positive affirmations. So we've talked about not thinking excessively about unhelpful thoughts is one thing, but actively thinking helpful thoughts has also got proven benefits, and research shows that it's helpful to do this. And it's really hard in the moment when you're in the state of panic or you're reacting and it's horrible. That is not the moment to think, think of something positive to say to myself. So it's useful to have created some positive affirmations for yourself that resonate with you, that you feel helpful, so that they're on standby, if you like. So when you're having a bad time, you can say those to yourself, and it helps to calm the nervous system. So you want a statement that is I am, not I am not. So you want, instead of I am not ill, you would say I am healthy, for example. That's the way round it wants to be, because our nervous system hears the positive. So play around with some affirmations. I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm calm. I'm healing. Every day I'm becoming whatever it is you want to become. Say those things to yourself as often as you can. You can make it part of your daily routine. You can say them out loud. You can say them in your head. You can say them in the mirror. Some people suggest you do that, but really just saying them as often as you can sends those signals of safety into the nervous system. And the thing with this is that we're building new neural pathways in our brain. The more we think, whatever we think about is what our brains habitually do. So the more we think about helpful things, the more the brain creates those helpful pathways in our brain. And when I worked for the Woodland Trust, they used to talk about, desire lines where people would just thrash through the undergrowth. And eventually, if people thrashed through the undergrowth enough, it would become a path. And that's the analogy that we're going for here. The more times you walk over and over that path in your mind, you want to be walking a helpful path rather than an unhelpful path. Joy and gratitude can feel really hard for us when we're suffering, because it's tough, really. And to be honest, some days it feels like there isn't a lot to be joyful about and there isn't a lot to be grateful for. And I totally get that. And there's a lot of talk, Davinia McCall and people like that. They're always on about gratitude journals and things, and it can feel really inaccessible because our lives are really difficult. But the science behind this is that it is impossible to feel joy and fear at the same time. Biologically, we just can't do that. And the same thing with gratitude. We can't feel gratitude and fear at the same time. So again, whenever we're genuinely feeling feelings of joy or gratitude, we're automatically signaling to our nervous system and our mast cells by default that we're safe. No one feels joyful or grateful when barbarians are at the gate, coming through with their spears about to kill you. So it's obvious to our bodies and our nervous system that we must be safe if we're feeling joy and gratitude. But it's really key that it's got to be genuine. It's no good thinking, oh, I feel really grateful for this. That's not going to work. You've got to feel it in your body. I feel joyful. You've got to get that kind of fizzy, excited feeling in your tummy or wherever you feel it. And gratitude, the same. That genuine felt sensation of gratitude is what's going to switch on brilliant chemicals in your body and switch off the danger signals. So 2 little tips. Try to look for one thing every day to feel joyful about, even, on the tough days. And some days you might not manage it because it's really tough, but try to find one thing. Can be tiny, a pink flower in your garden that's, lovely and pretty. A friend phones you, just, the sun shining in the sky, or you get something, a letter from a friend through the post. Find one thing that brings you joy, looking at the stars, reading your favorite book, whatever, and just take some time rather than just thinking, oh yeah, that's nice. Take some time to really savor it, because it takes time for positive emotions to register in our brains and our bodies. So you need to look at that flower for a few seconds and think, isn't that lovely? And really feel that positive feeling. And we can get that sense gradually. We can build an awareness that good things still exist in the middle of difficulty. There's a duality there. Things are not all good or all bad. We can find joy even when we're suffering, even when we're poorly. And the similar thing, find one thing every day to feel grateful for. Just, someone that's with you in your life that helps you, someone that smiles at you in a shop, your favorite song coming on the radio. Just notice the gratitude again, just feel it and savor it. And writing it down, that's why people talk about journaling. It compounds the effects. you can, you know, get more benefit. It switches on different neural pathways if you write it down. And then you can reread it and kind of relive those good things when things are difficult. And then this little section on being kind to ourselves. The first thing is not beating ourselves up. And we've talked about this, we've touched it a little bit. It is difficult for us. And I know I'm the worst for beating myself up and not being as kind to myself as I should be. And I know that many of us blame ourselves for being ill or feeling a burden, or we beat ourselves up regularly for all sorts of things. And we all find it hard to be kind to ourselves. But when we do that, we're sending those signals of danger into our nervous system, and we're releasing lots of those stress hormones, because our body can't tell the difference between us being unkind to ourselves and someone else being unkind to us. Feels like a threat to the body. So the best thing we can do for ourselves is to be kind to ourselves, because when we do that, we're releasing nitric oxide. Our bodies respond to self-kindness by releasing oxytocin and nitric oxide and all the good chemicals. And it is, you know, it is hard to do this, but we just spend a few moments recognizing that it's hard, this is difficult, and being kind to ourselves in the same way that we would do that for a friend or a child who was suffering. So think about, if you find it hard, think, what would I say to my best friend if she was or he was going through this? What would I say to a small child? And say that to yourself. It's okay. You're going to get through this. You're all right. Acknowledge the suffering and offer yourself some kindness. And we all feel sometimes, you know, that we've done something that's triggered a reaction, and it's hard not to beat ourselves up for that. But again, that just compounds the issue. You've got the reaction, and then you've got the suffering of the stress as well. So just be kind to ourselves is the key thing there. Cultivating a sense of your own self-worth. So remind yourself often of your achievements. You've got talents, you've got skills, you've got values. Make a list and think about that, because we often lose that sense of self-worth when we're poorly. But being sick doesn't take any of that away from you. You have value and you have worth. So it's important to remind yourself of that daily. And there's so many reasons to beat ourselves up and feel really shit about ourselves, but we have to make a conscious effort to force ourselves to recognize the good in us and our own value as a person. In spite of illness, we have value in our own right. Taking positive steps towards your own well-being. So I totally advocate learning and researching and empowering yourself, because it gives you a sense of control. And when we feel in control, we feel safe. So identifying your triggers, understanding what you need to do to help yourself. The more you can learn about yourself and your illness, the more you can help yourself, the more in control you are, the better. Advocating for yourself with friends and family and with doctors as well, and healthcare professionals. You know your body best. You know your own needs. So don't be afraid to speak up and to say what you need. And hope. It's always important to hold on to hope and believe that there will be improvement, and believe in a better future, and you can get better than you are today. And I love this quote: action is hope, but there's no hope without action. So taking positive action to help ourselves, again, makes us feel in control and feeds in that sense of safety. Having a sense of purpose is really important, and we can lose that when we're poorly, but it's linked to longevity and better health and well-being, physical and mental health outcomes. We all need, as humans, to feel that we're contributing to something that's greater than ourselves. We have value, our lives have purpose, and, you know, we become too poorly to work, we feel like we're not achieving things, we lose our sense of purpose. So I think it's really important to find really small things that you can do that give you that sense of meaning and purpose. And it doesn't have to be enormous. You know, it's not like getting a qualification or getting a job. I fed the birds. On my sickest days, I dragged myself out of bed and I fed the birds, and I felt as though I was doing something that had value. But, you know, just answering a message on the Facebook group, you know, reaching out to someone and sharing some information or giving them some advice or some support, that's a thing that you can do. It has value. So even when we're really poorly, we can find something that gives us purpose. So I'm going to leave you with 10 top tips. Don't beat yourself up. I've said that no end of times, but I'm going to say it one more time. Don't beat yourself up about MCAS or anything else. Taking control of your thoughts and choosing to think kind and helpful thoughts is really powerful. Stay in the present. Don't think too much about the past or the future, and maybe consider whether mindfulness might help you and use the downloads. Avoid watching stressful, violent things on television. Remember that that impacts our nervous system. Our brains can't tell that that's not really happening to us. So while we're poorly, it's not the best thing to do. Look for joy, deliberately find things in your day that make you feel happy. Look for reasons to be grateful, even when that feels difficult. Build up that sense of your own self-worth. Take proactive steps to your own well-being. Advocate for yourself and your well-being, and research and empower yourself. Find these small ways that you can feel a sense of purpose and remain hopeful for the future. So those are my contact details. If people want to follow me on social media, there's nothing on my YouTube channel at the moment, but I've made one. Eventually there will be videos on there one day when I've worked out how to do that. But I'm on Facebook. I'm not on it very often, but I do post on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, so you can find me on there if you want to keep in touch, or on my website. You can sign up to my mailing list on my website, and when I have the energy, I occasionally send out a newsletter